My name's Alicia Nolan. Part of my healing journey now, and what I like to call my new normal, started when my wife died by suicide on August 17th, 2022. So my wife and I, we actually met online in August of 2017. We just enjoyed talking to each other and getting to know each other. She moved into my house about a month after we got married, and we were inseparable. We enjoyed doing lots of activities together, lots of hiking, rock climbing. I even got her into running with me. I saw some struggles. She had a past. She had a rough past. It wasn't until about 2020 that I started to see some of her demons kind of come forward. Some of it had to do with her misuse of. I didn't understand up until about 2020 that it was a problem, and I voiced my concerns of her misuse of her and just requested that she use it as prescribed. Then things started to get worse through COVID. She was a teacher. She taught second grade. Teaching's hard for a lot of people, and COVID really had a major impact on a lot of teachers. I think in 2021 is when things started to really transition to just drinking a lot more. She was still a teacher at the time, drinking a lot more, misusing her. Things would set her into a spiral. At times, we would have our moments of getting into arguments and everything, but she still resorted to, and a lot of times. She quit her teaching job in December of 21. That's when things really started to take a turn with her mental health, and she started a new job. But one thing that she started to do was vape on a daily basis. Then in May of 2022, she started taking ADHD meds. So she was juggling a lot, a new full-time job that she was trying to learn. Mind you, I had stepkids. She had 2 biological kids. There's just a lot going on. And then she started taking the ADHD meds. And it was at that point, it was about April and May, where I started doing some research and discovered that she actually had borderline personality disorder. In July, I finished my master's degree. I was done with school. I was about to leave for annual training for National Guard. I was active duty until 2020, Army, and then I transitioned to the National Guard. An event took place right before I left for the National Guard. She basically had a falling out with her kids, and they kind of moved out of the house. And this was the day I left for National Guard drill. That day I was up in Denver, my unit's in Denver, and she told me what happened. And I had to run home anyways to grab something. So I went home to check on her, see how she was doing. And she was just like, I'm fine. The house is quiet. I'm fine. I'm like, okay, just if you need anything, of course, call me. Throughout my drill, I talked to her as often as I could. There were a couple of days where we were out in the field and didn't have cell service and stuff, but she expressed to me over and over that she was fine. We were up in Wyoming during drill, but the last few days of drill, we were back down in Denver, and I was able to come home those last couple of nights. And she was clearly distraught. The last night before the last day of drill, she had a breakdown. And she basically shared her thoughts with me on how she was doing with, her and the kids having not spoken for those 2 weeks. I remember we fell asleep watching TV, or I fell asleep watching TV, and I woke up at one point and the TV was still on, and I looked over at her, and she was writing in a journal, and I rolled over and was like, hey, what are you doing? She said, I'm journaling. But she never did. And at that moment, I was like, oh, that's really great. You're finally getting into journaling and sharing your thoughts. I woke up really early the next day. It was my last day of drill. A few minutes before I had to leave the house, her alarm went off for work. And I went upstairs. She asked if I was leaving, and I told her a few minutes. I went back downstairs, and she came down. And I just remember giving her this big hug. So I headed up to Denver, and I texted her like I did every time. Whenever I got to work, I texted her and said, hey, I'm here. I love you. And she texted me back and said, I love you. About an hour later, I noticed that she hadn't texted me to let me know she got to work, because that's just what we did every day. We let each other know when we got somewhere. And she didn't respond. I looked at the cameras on the house, and I saw that she left for work late, which is weird. So I texted her and I said, hey, did you leave did you leave late for work? I had texted my friend that she had gotten hired by, and I said, hey, did my wife show up to work? She got back to me a few minutes later, and she said she called out. So I immediately went out to the lobby area, and I tried to call her, and her phone was going straight to voicemail. So I went straight to my first sergeant, and I told her everything that was going on, and I just told her, I was like, I need to go home. It's like something's not right. She left the house, and I know she hasn't gone back to the house because I can see when she comes back. And she tried to get somebody to come with me, and I just told her, I was like, I just need to get to the house. She ended up letting me go, and mind you, this was an hour and 15-minute drive, and it was excruciating. I called my sister-in-law, told her what's happening. She was throwing some ideas out there, but she tried to call like emergency rooms and her therapist, my wife's therapist, and see if she could find anything out, and she couldn't. As I'm approaching the house, I was probably about 5 minutes from the house, and I knew that I was going to find their notes on the counter, and I just felt in my gut that my gun was going to be gone, which I had in my safe, in my closet, in our closet. So as soon as I walked in the door, sure enough, the journals that she was writing in the night before, they were laying on the counter, and I called my sister-in-law, and I was just crying, telling her that I found notes, and she said, is your gun still there? And I went up there and opened the safe, and it was gone. So I got off the phone with her, and I called 911, and I think about 2 minutes later, if that, it was very quickly, I get a knock on the door, and there was a sheriff at the door, and my first thought was, wow, that was fast. He took the phone and he talked to whoever the operator was on for 911, and then he came inside and he asked me to sit down, and that's when he told me that they found her. Yeah, the first thing I did was just kind of hit the ground and just cry. I made a couple of phone calls, but I asked the sheriff not to leave. My first sergeant actually called a buddy that was down in the Springs, and he was the first one to come. The sheriff left, and he asked me what he could do, and I told him that he could take all the out of the house. So he did exactly that, because I knew that just wasn't a path I wanted to go down. I knew what it would look like, and that just it's not where I wanted to go. People just started showing up. I have an incredible community of people. Every single person that asked me what they could do, whether they text or messaged or called or whatever, my only response was that I didn't want to be alone. So for the first month, somebody was there with me. People stayed the night. My family came in town. They were there for a couple of weeks, but my friends are absolutely incredible, and they stayed with me every second. I feel like I accepted very quickly that she was gone and I couldn't bring her back, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life anymore. I knew that at some point, I wasn't going to be able to have people who weren't going to be there. I knew that would probably fade away, and I accepted that. I knew that was coming. It was scary still, but I knew it was going to happen. I was looking for a dog. I knew that I needed a companion to kind of keep me going. And we had a few cats together, and they were really great, but dogs, they're really special. And I'd been looking at French bulldogs, and there was a 1-year-old that I ended up rescuing from a breeder on September 14th. And she was my absolute light. She was pretty pivotal in my healing journey. One thing that I knew that I needed was also just human connection. And I ended up making a strong connection a lot earlier than I expected, or what society would deem to be too soon. So I wasn't searching for anything, but I ended up finding a human being that just saw me for me. And especially after such a tragic incident, like, I never thought I would find love again. I never thought that anybody could love me still. My wife died by suicide, and I still didn't think anybody could love me as much as she did, which is so twisted, but it's absolutely true. I just never imagined it ever happening. And I just so happened to meet an incredible human being within a couple months afterwards who saw me for me, who values me for who I am, understanding that I just had this the worst tragedy happened, but was willing to hold my hand and be there for me throughout my healing journey. I tried to go back to work. I was doing personal training at a gym that was local. Tried to go back to work. It didn't go well. I was having panic attacks, and there's something weird. Well, one, trauma brain is absolutely a thing. I have PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And the fuzziness, the lack of function that I have experienced since that event is so hard to explain and describe, but it's absolutely a thing. One of the weirdest things was probably when I was at work, at a job that I was doing when I was around. And it's like when you really get involved in work and you just can't think of anything else, and you still feel like somebody's back home. And then when you separate yourself and you go, wait a second, like I had to constantly remind myself that I was no longer at home. That it was the weirdest transition when I was in my workplace. Like I would be really involved, and then I would just have to remind myself that she is no longer here, that she took her life. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't work in that environment. So I stopped working at the gym in December of 22, and I decided to just do a personal training studio out of my garage. So I painted my garage, I got the floors done and everything, and transitioned it into basically a home gym. And I love health and fitness. Incredibly passionate about it. I love helping people. So that's what I started off doing. And mind you, throughout all of this, I am going to therapy on a weekly basis. I have learned a lot of self-care techniques to help me through some of my depression and anxiety and everything. A lot of breathing, meditation. So just trying to take care of myself, because if there's anything I've learned throughout this entire process, it's how important self-care is. I started to get an idea in March of 2023 that I wanted to start tackling the mental health stigma that exists and suicide prevention awareness. So that's when I came up with my brand, Live, where the I is a semicolon. And I started screen printing t-shirts and eventually tank tops and then sweatshirts, and I make all my product. But my business is called Choose to Live. And I think it was probably in July or August, I made the decision that that's what I wanted to do full time, was build my brand. And I started off small, obviously. I started doing like vendor events, and every vendor event that I did was so powerful with every connection that I made with somebody. I've had people walk straight up to my booth and just start crying. Lots of hugs, lots of stories. Sometimes somebody just wants to tell their story. And I think with it, the semicolon, when people see it, there's this willingness to be vulnerable in that moment. Like this complete stranger, all they want to do is tell their story. So where I'm at now is, one, pursuing my passion now of suicide prevention awareness and mental health, and getting people to talk more about it. This is what I feel to be my purpose, and where I'm meant to be is tell my story, hoping to inspire people to keep pushing forward, keep moving forward, and you can still live your life.